The Cuban Missile Crisis is often remembered as a masterpiece of strategy, two superpowers locked in a tense, calculated game of diplomatic chess. This narrative relies on the doctrine of mutual assured destruction. The theory assumed that because both sides could annihilate the other, neither would strike first. But deterrence requires a flawless system, perfect communication, total visibility, and absolute rational control over every warhead. In 1961, the United States deployed Jupiter nuclear missiles in Italy and Turkey. In response, the Soviet Union secretly shipped R-12 ballistic missiles to Cuba, just 90 miles from the Florida coast. When American U-2 spy planes photographed the construction, the intelligence confirmed active launch positions and missile erectors. The geopolitical balance had vanished. President John F. Kennedy ordered a naval quarantine to block Soviet ships. He gambled that American deterrence would force the Soviets to turn back without a single shot being fired. This concept of perfect control was a dangerous illusion. Systems built to manage an apocalypse were vulnerable to the very human errors and mechanical failures they were designed to prevent. By October 27, 1962, known as Black Saturday, the crisis had shifted from the war rooms of Washington to the suffocating physical reality of the open ocean. A Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine, the B-59, was creeping toward the U.S. blockade line. Submerged deep in the Caribbean, the vessel was completely isolated from Moscow's command structure. On this day, the theoretical chess match broke down. The fate of the world now rested in the hands of a sweating, isolated crew inside a steel tube. The first failure was the hardware itself. The Soviet military had deployed an Arctic-class diesel submarine into the high-temperature waters of the Caribbean. Because the sub could not surface to recharge its batteries, the ventilation systems failed. As temperatures inside reached 50 degrees Celsius, carbon dioxide levels spiked, and oxygen dropped to 16%. Sailors began to hallucinate and faint at their stations. Rational decision-making requires oxygen. The physical toll of heat stroke and deprivation severely compromised the cognitive state required for nuclear deterrence to function. While the B-59 struggled below, the U.S. Navy located the sub and began dropping practice depth charges. These were small explosives, the size of hand grenades, intended to signal the sub to surface. The U.S. had issued a notice to mariners explaining this tactic, but the information never reached the submerged Soviet commanders. Inside the B-59, the crew heard only the roar of explosions. Cut off from radio contact, the captain interpreted the blasts as lethal military strikes. The assumption of perfect communication had failed. A simple naval warning was now being treated as the outbreak of World War III. A third flaw emerged in the chain of command. Unlike the centralized control of the U.S. arsenal, Soviet submarine captains had the decentralized authority to launch a nuclear weapon independently. Exhausted and believing his ship was under attack, Captain Savitsky assumed Moscow had already been destroyed. He ordered the ship's 10-kiloton T-5 nuclear torpedo prepped for launch. Only a procedural anomaly blocked the order. Flotilla Chief Vasily Arkhipov happened to be aboard the B-59, and his presence required a unanimous 3-officer vote to authorize a launch. For 15 minutes, the officers argued. Arkhipov leveraged his absolute authority, his knowledge of U.S. tactics, and finally blocked the vote, convincing Savitsky to surface instead. Survival came down to the luck of a redundant procedural protocol and the physical restraint of one man. The B-59 breached the surface and was immediately caught in the white glare of U.S. naval searchlights. The crew stood down their weapons. At the same time, Kennedy and Khrushchev finalized a secret trade, removing Soviet missiles from Cuba in exchange for American missiles leaving Turkey. The politicians finalized their settlement while remaining unaware that at sea, a nuclear torpedo had already been prepped for launch. The incident forced a geopolitical realization. Slow, indirect communication was an existential threat to survival. To bypass bureaucratic delays, the superpowers created the Washington-Moscow hotline, providing a direct hardware link between their leaders. This was paired with the 1972 Incidents at Sea Agreement, a set of rules to standardize naval signaling and prevent tactical misunderstandings from escalating into war. In the face of apocalyptic technology, human survival relies not on deterrence theories, but on resilient systems, clear communication, and the capacity for individual restraint.